Welcome to our emotion. You are not wrong in the selection. Industrial revolution, bustling markets and historic buildings. What was Chicago like in the 1800s and 1900s? Let's take a trip back in time through old photos. Chicago experienced a period of great change and development between the 1800s and 1900s. Here are some interesting facts about this period. Chicago was a rapidly growing city from just 200 people in 1833. It grew to more than 1 million by 1890. This made it one of the fastest growing cities in the world. The streets were made of wood in the mid-1800s. Chicago was in a swampy area, so the streets were covered with wooden planks. But it increased the risk of fire and was one of the factors that caused the Chicago Fire of 1871. Chicago Fire, 1871. A famous large fire destroyed a large part of the city center. After the fire, the streets were rebuilt with modern stone or asphalt pavements. One of the first high-rise bridges in the world was built in 1869. The first high-rise bridge was built in Chicago. This bridge has an opening and closing structure for the passage of ships across the river. 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Chicago streets and infrastructure were heavily modernized for this event. It was during this event that the famous Ferris wheel, Big Circle, was presented to the public for the first time. Elevated trains in 1892. Chicago launched the first elevated rail train system in the United States, known as the L. This system has become an integral part of urban transport. Cars were used to keep tram lines open during the winter. The streets were littered with garbage and mud in the late 1800s. The streets were filthy because of poor sanitation. People would simply throw their waste on the streets, resulting in piles of horse dung and garbage. Toll roads. A toll system has been introduced to use some streets and roads. People paid money to pass through some areas. There were special snowplow trams, special snowplow The problem of water elevation. Chicago was located in a swampy area, so the city had to be raised. In the 1850s, entire buildings and even entire streets were lifted using special jacks. The streets of Chicago are up because Chicago was located in a low-lying and swampy area. The sanitation system was very poor. In the 1850s and 1860s, were raised several feet using jacks. Imagine that while people continued to live inside the buildings, the city was being raised from under them. Cows walked freely in the streets. You must have heard about the famous Chicago Fire of 1871. Unfortunately, this fire was most likely started by a lantern knocked over by Mrs. O'Leary's cow. At that time, cows, pigs and even sheep roamed the streets of the city. Chicago's dirtiest place, Death Creek. In the 1800s, the Chicago River was a dumping ground for the city's garbage and waste. As a result, the river has increasingly become a swamp and a toxic body of water. People drank the river water, which caused the spread of typhus and other diseases. In 1900, engineers changed the course of the entire river and diverted. At that time, cows, pigs and even sheep roamed the streets of the Mississippi River. One of the engineering marvels. Streets full of criminals. By the late 1800s, Chicago was the most crime-ridden city in America. Areas such as Maxwell Street and Custom House Place were full of gangsters, pickpockets and crooks. In particular, a famous murderer named H.H. Holmes terrorized the city during the 1893 World's Fair. Chicago was a hidden city to live in. After the streets and buildings were raised, as a result, networks of hidden passages and tunnels appeared under the city. Some old restaurants and hotels used these as secret drinking spots where you could get drunk. The new sky pillars are the first skyscrapers. In 1885, the world's first skyscraper, the Home Insurance Building, was built in Chicago. It was only 10 stories high, but for that time it was considered a huge building. The appearance of the streets changed completely, and the city began to grow upwards. In the next videos, which city streets or which country's history would you like me to animate using AI? Your opinion is important to me. Don't forget to click like to support my work. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and enjoy the unlimited possibilities and beauties of AI. Everything for you at AI Motion.